Sit on your bed one day and ask yourself, what remarkably stupid things am I doing on a regular basis to absolutely screw up my life? And if you actually ask that question, but you have to want to know the answer, right? Because that's actually what asking the question means. It doesn't mean just mouthing the words. It means you have to decide that you want to know. You'll figure that out so fast it'll make your hair curl. I'm going to manifest myself in the best possible manner in the world. I would like to do that. What would that be? Well, you're perfectly capable of thinking. God only knows how. You're perfectly capable of immense feats of imagination and dream and fantasies. God only knows how you do all of that. What would happen if you consulted yourself about the best possible outcome for you? You might get an answer. Well, that's what this proposition is. Faith makes being good. It's a very interesting proposition. And so the notion would be, and it's an action-oriented issue as well. You act out the proposition that if you act properly in the world, that being will reveal itself to you as benevolent. But you will not know. You'll never know unless you do it. So this is a call to that. Act out the proposition that if you act properly, that being itself is benevolent. It's often read as be nice to other people. It's like that is not what this rule means. It doesn't mean that even a little bit. It means something like, and we'll reverse it so that we'll concentrate on you rather than the other person to begin with. It means something like, conceptualize how things could be great if they were great for you, if you were taking care of yourself, and then work to make that the case for everyone else. You know, you see that in Buddhism because Buddha reached Nirvana, right? That's the theory. And then he was tempted with the offer to stay there. And he rejected that offer and came back to the profane world because he felt that the attainment of nirvana was insufficient unless everyone attained it simultaneously. And so it's something like that. But it's treat yourself properly. That's a hard thing to do because you're a fallen, shameful, cowardly, deceitful, malevolent, mortal creature. And so it's not easy, and you know it, and it's not easy to treat something like that properly. And it isn't obvious that people treat themselves better than they treat other people. I don't think that's obvious at all. But maybe you could start with yourself and think, okay, I'm going to take care of myself as if I have value. What would that look like? And then I'm going to work to extend that courtesy to everyone else. And that's, well, the hypothesis here is that if you take all of the moral wisdom that mankind has generated over its millennia of struggle, evolved and then manifested in metaphor and story, and then codified into law, articulated law, and you pick one principle that dominated all of that, this would be the principle. Everyone in their right mind knows that there's a million ways of doing things wrong, and one way, if you're lucky, to do things right. And so the notion that it's a very, very narrow pathway that you tread upon if you're doing things right, that's wisdom. That's the line between chaos and order that you're supposed to be on constantly, right? It's a very, very thin line because if you're a little bit too far in one direction, then it's too much chaos. And if you're a little too far in the other direction, then it's too much order. And both of those aren't good. The balance has to be exactly right. And you can feel that. And I truly believe you can feel that. And I think it's your deepest instinct. It's your deepest instinct. And I mean that biologically. I don't mean that metaphorically. I think that your psyche is arranged to exist in a cosmos that's composed of chaos and order. I think that's why you have the hemispheric structure that you have. This is deeper than metaphor. And then when you feel as if you're meaningfully engaged in the world, when the terror of your mortality strips away and you're engaged and it's timeless, that's the deepest instinct you have telling you that you're in the right place at the right time. And then what you do is practice being there. Practice being there. And that's that narrow spot that's so difficult to find. You wander around it. Maybe if you're lucky, you can watch. You can watch. This is an experiment. Watch yourself for 2 weeks. Like you don't know who you are, because you don't. So watch yourself for 2 weeks and notice there's going to be times when things are proper. They're arrayed properly for you. It's not easy to notice because when they're arrayed like that, you're so engaged, you don't exactly notice, you know. But you'll see, oh, I'm in the right place. It's like, okay, how'd I get here? What am I doing right? You know, how is it that this could happen more often? I'd like this to happen more often. How would I have to conduct myself in order for that to happen more often? And then you practice that, and then maybe instead of 10 minutes a month or 10 minutes a week, it's like 15 minutes a day, and then it's half an hour a day, and then it's an hour a day, and then it's 4 hours a day. And maybe if you're extraordinarily careful, then you get to a point where you're like that a good proportion of the time. When I'm in my clinical practice and I observe, and this is also the case with my students, is let's say, people's lives aren't what they would like them to be. And so then you ask, why? Well, forget about tragedy and catastrophe, because that's self-evident, and we're not going to discuss that. Although the degree to which you bring about your own tragedy is always indeterminate. But I would never say that every terrible thing that is visited on a person is something they deserved. I think that that's a very dangerous presupposition, especially because everyone gets sick and everyone dies. But one of the main reasons that people don't get what they want is because they don't actually figure out what it is. And the probability that you're going to get what would be good for you, let's say, which would even be better than what you want, right? Because, you know, you might be wrong about what you want easily. But maybe you could get what would really be good for you. Well, why don't you? Well, because you don't try. You don't think, okay, here's what I would like if I could have it. And I don't mean in a way that you manipulate the world to force it to deliver you goods for status or something like that. That isn't what I mean. I mean something like, imagine that you were taking care of yourself like you were someone you actually cared for. And then you thought, okay, I'm caring for this person. I would like things to go as well for them as possible. What would their life have to be like in order for that to be the case? Well, people don't do that. They don't sit down and think, all right, you know, let's figure it out. You've got a life. It's hard, obviously. It's like 3 years from now, you can have what you need. You've got to be careful about it. You can't have everything. You can have what would be good for you, but you have to figure out what it is, and then you have to aim at it. Well, my experience with people has been is, if they figure out what it is that would be good for them, and then they aim at it, then they get it. And it's strange because they don't it's a strange thing. It's not quite that simple because, you know, you may formulate an idea about what would be good for you, and then you take 10 steps towards that, and you find out that your formulation was a bit off, and so you have to reformulate your goal. You know, so you're kind of going like this as you move towards the goal. But a huge part of the reason that people fail is because they don't ever set up the criteria for success. And so, since success is a very narrow line and very unlikely, the probability that you're going to stumble on it randomly is 0. And so there's a proposition here, and the proposition is, if you actually want something, you can have it. Now the question then would be, well, what do you mean by actually want? And the answer is that you reorient your life in every possible way to make the probability that that will occur as certain as possible. And that's a sacrificial idea, right? It's like, you don't get everything. Obviously. But maybe you can have what you need. And maybe all you have to do to get it is ask. But the asking isn't a whim or today's wish. It's like, you have to be deadly serious about it. You have to think, okay, like I'm taking stock of myself. And if I was going to live properly in the world and I was going to set myself up such that being would justify itself in my estimation, and I don't mean as a harsh judge, exactly what is it that I would aim at? How is it that I'm wrong in this situation? I'll tell you something that I learned to do when I was arguing with my wife, which happened quite frequently, because when you actually communicate with people, you find out that there's many things that you don't agree on, and that's because you're actually different creatures. And so, if you're actually going to have a truthful conversation, then you're going to find out that you don't see things the same way, and then you can either pretend that that's not the case and gloss over it and then end up in a 30-year silent war, or you can have the damn fight when you need to have it and see if you can straighten it out. So now and then we'd get in a situation where we were at loggerheads, we couldn't move. And, you know, it would spiral up into hate speech, let's say. Because, yeah, everyone laughs because they know they manifest plenty of hate speech towards those they love. So one of the things we learned to do was, when we hit an impasse, was to separate and to go our own ways and to go sit and think, okay, look, we're at this unpleasant situation. We can't figure out how to move forward. I'd always think, Of course it's her fault. Obviously it's her fault. At least 95%. But maybe there was something I did that contributed like 5% to it. And so I would sit and think and ask myself a question, which was, is there anything I did in the last 6 months that increased the probability that this impasse would manifest itself? And I'll tell you, you have no idea how fast your mind will generate an answer to a question like that. Because there's undoubtedly some idiotic thing that you did, that you know, that you remember, that increased the probability that you're going to have your hands around the throat of the person that you love. And then you can go tell them that. And then you can have a conversation, especially if they do the same thing. Say, look, you know, here's how I'm an idiot in this situation. And the other person says, well, yeah, here's how I'm an idiot. And then you're two idiots, and then maybe you can have a conversation. It's interesting, you know, like the most profound people that I've read who've meditated deeply on the problem, say, of totalitarian catastrophe, and I would put Alexander Solzhenitson at the top of that list. You know, his entire corpus, 3 volumes, 700 pages long each, in tiny type, is a long scream about the absolute necessity of the absolute necessity of individual honesty and ethical behavior as the only bulwark against totalitarian catastrophe. And I've read many writers who've attempted to diagnose the problems of the 20th century. And I think Solzhenitson, he came to the same conclusions that Viktor Frankl came to as a consequence of his experiences in the Nazi concentration camps. And Frankl, I'm also an admirer of Frankl, but Solzhenitsyn takes it to an entire different level of profundity and makes an extraordinarily strong case that not only do societies deteriorate because the people within the societies become individually corrupt, but that the only way to stave that off is for the individuals within that society to reject that corruption in the confines of their own personal lives. And he tells endless stories of people that he met in the gulag, in the work camps, in the death camps in the Soviet Union, of people, and this is what he learned, of people who were so incredibly tough that even under conditions, the most possible extreme conditions, there wasn't a chance that they were going to step off that straight and narrow line. There was nothing the authorities could do to move them. And just watching that was enough to transform Solzhenitsyn, because of course one of the things he wondered was, after spending a good amount of time in the work camps, well, just exactly how did I get here? And it wasn't, well, it was Hitler's fault and it was Stalin's fault, although it was definitely the fault of both of them. For Solzhenitsyn, it was also his fault, because he was playing the same game. He just wasn't as good at it. I looked at what happened in places like the Soviet Union and Maoist China and in Nazi Germany, and the most penetrating observers of those societies, the people who were most interested in how it was that those absolute catastrophes came about, all said the same thing. It was rooted in the degeneration of the individuals who made up the society. You know, you hear, well, people were following orders. It's like, no, that explanation doesn't hold water. Or that you'd be punished if you resisted. Well, there was some truth in that, but nowhere near as much as people might think, especially at the beginnings of the process. More it was that people decided, each and every one of them, to turn a blind eye to the catastrophes and to participate in the lies. And that warped the entire societies, and they went as, you know, they veered their way downward to something as closely approximating hell as you could hope to manage, especially in places like Nazi Germany and, well, in all 3 of those places, in Maoist China and in the Soviet Union. And so the thing that's so frightening about, one of the things that's so frightening about the stories in Genesis is they say something very clear, which is that your moral degeneration contributes in no small way to the degeneration of the entire cosmos. And you say, well, I would like my life to be meaningful. People say that. Really, would you? Really? You really would like your life to be meaningful? You think maybe people would trade a little nihilism to not have to face that particular realization, and I think people do that all the time. It's a terrible weight to realize, but we are networked together. That's the price of, or let's say that's the vulnerability that's associated with our intense capacity to communicate. And it is certainly possible that the ripples of our individual actions have consequences that are far beyond the limits of our immediate consciousness. And I also think people know that too. They know that in the way that people know things when they don't want to know them, which means they know them embodied. They can feel them, they can sense them, they have an emotional response to them, but there's no damn way they're going to let them become articulate because they don't want to know. And when you're feeling guilty and ashamed about the things you've done or not done, and I know that can get out of hand as well, it's often because there is a crooked little part of you that's aiming at the worst possible outcome.